They abandoned her with no one's child. A hell's angel took her in and said, "She's mine now." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The wind moved slowly through the empty street of a quiet Midwestern town late on a cold autumn night. Most of the houses were dark and silent, their porch lights glowing softly over neat lawns and wooden fences. A small stone church stood at the end of Maple Street, its white paint faded from many long winters and its bell tower rising quietly against the black sky. At this hour the town slept peacefully, unaware that a moment was about to unfold that would change two lives forever. Headlights appeared at the far end of the road. A dark sedan rolled slowly toward the church parking lot. The engine hummed softly as the car stopped near the front steps where a wooden cross hung above the entrance doors. For several long seconds the vehicle remained still. Then the driver's side door opened. A tall man stepped out and looked around the empty street with restless eyes. His movements were quick and impatient as he walked around to the back seat and pulled the door open. Inside sat a small girl wrapped in a thin sweater that was far too light for the cold night air. She could not have been more than 6 years old. Her dark hair fell loosely across her cheeks, and her small hands clutched a worn cloth rabbit that had clearly been loved for many years. The man did not speak kindly to her. His voice was cold and sharp as he lifted her out of the car and placed her on the sidewalk near the church steps. The little girl looked up at him with confusion and fear as if she did not understand why they had stopped here in the middle of the night. Around her neck hung a small piece of cardboard tied with rough string. The words written on it were simple but cruel. "No one's child." The man did not look back at her again. He shut the car door with a hard sound that echoed across the quiet street. Within seconds the sedan pulled away and disappeared down the dark road, leaving the little girl alone under the weak glow of the church light. She stood there trembling slightly in the cold wind, holding her cloth rabbit close to her chest, as if it were the only thing left in the world that belonged to her. Minutes passed slowly. The town remained silent. Then in the distance another sound broke the quiet night. The deep rumble of a large motorcycle echoed through the empty streets like distant thunder. The powerful machine rolled into view and slowed as it approached Maple Street. The rider wore a black leather jacket with the unmistakable emblem of the Hell's Angels across the back. His name was Marcus Steele Lawson, a man known throughout the county as someone most people preferred to avoid. His motorcycle engine softened as he passed the church, but then Marcus suddenly rolled off the throttle. Something near the steps had caught his attention. Under the yellow porch light, he saw the small figure standing alone. For a long moment Marcus remained still on the motorcycle, staring at the child and the piece of cardboard hanging around her neck as the wind lifted the edges of the sign. Even from the street, he could read the words clearly. "No one's child." Marcus Steele Lawson felt something shift deep inside his chest that he had not felt in many years. Marcus Steele Lawson slowly lowered the kickstand of his heavy motorcycle as the deep rumble of the engine faded into the cold night air. For a moment he remained seated, his gloved hands resting on the handlebars while his eyes stayed fixed on the small girl standing alone beneath the church light. The sign around her neck moved slightly in the wind, and the words written across the cardboard were impossible to ignore. "No one's child." Marcus had ridden thousands of miles across countless highways during his life, and he had seen many hard things along the road. Or fights, broken families, men who had lost everything. But something about the sight in front of him felt different. The child was not crying loudly. She was simply standing there quietly, as if she had already learned that the world did not always listen when children cried. Marcus removed his helmet slowly and set it on the seat of the motorcycle. His thick beard moved slightly in the wind as he studied the scene more carefully. The church steps were empty. The street was silent. No car headlights appeared in the distance. Whoever had brought the girl here had truly left her behind. Marcus walked toward her with slow, careful steps so he would not frighten her. His boots made a dull sound against the pavement as he approached the edge of the church walkway. Up close he could see that the girl was smaller than he first thought. Her sweater was thin and worn, and her shoes looked too small for her growing feet. Her fingers held tightly to the cloth rabbit, as if letting go might cause it to disappear as well. When she noticed the large biker approaching, she stepped backward slightly. Her wide eyes moved from the leather jacket to the patches sewn across Marcus' jacket. She had probably heard stories about men who wore that symbol. Many people had. Marcus noticed the fear immediately and stopped walking so that he would not appear threatening. He slowly crouched down until he was closer to her height. The cold pavement pressed against his knee, but he did not seem to notice. "Hey there, kid," he said quietly. His voice was deep and rough from many years of shouting over loud engines and barroom music, but he tried to soften it. "You are not in trouble." The little girl looked at him carefully without answering. Her eyes were large and dark and carried the cautious expression of a child who had already learned to measure every adult before trusting them. Marcus gently nodded toward the cardboard sign hanging from the string around her neck. "Did someone put that on you?" he asked. The girl hesitated for a moment before slowly nodding her head. Her voice was barely louder than a whisper when she finally spoke. "My daddy said nobody wants me anymore." The words landed heavily in the cold night air. Marcus felt a tight pressure in his chest that surprised him with its sudden strength. For several seconds he did not reply. Instead, he carefully reached forward and untied the rough string from around the girl neck. The cardboard sign slipped into his hand, and he stared at the cruel words again before quietly folding it in half. "No child should ever have to wear something like that," he said softly. The girl watched him closely as if trying to decide whether he meant what he said. "What is your name, kid?" Marcus asked. "Emma," the girl answered. "Emma Collins." Marcus nodded slowly. "That is a good strong name," he said. "My name is Marcus Steele Lawson, but most people just call me Steele." Emma looked at him again, then glanced at the motorcycle parked nearby. The machine looked enormous beside the quiet church steps. "Are you going to leave too?" she asked quietly. Marcus Steele Lawson remained kneeling there for a long moment as the wind moved through the empty street. Finally, he shook his head once. "Not tonight, Emma," he said. "Not tonight." Marcus Steele Lawson remained kneeling on the cold pavement while the wind moved quietly through Maple Street. Emma Collins stood only a few feet away from him, clutching her worn cloth rabbit as if it were the only safe thing left in the world. The church light above the wooden doors cast a soft yellow glow across the steps, making the empty street appear even lonelier. Marcus studied the small girl carefully. Years of riding long highways had trained his eyes to notice details quickly. Now he noticed the faint marks on Emma's arms where the thin sleeves of her sweater had slid back. They were not large bruises, but they were enough to tell a story that Marcus did not like. He felt a slow anger building deep inside his chest, the kind that did not explode right away but burned steadily like a quiet fire. Emma followed his gaze and quickly pulled her sleeves down again as if she had learned to hide things like that. Marcus spoke gently so his voice would not frighten her. "Emma, did someone hurt you tonight?" The girl hesitated before answering. Her eyes lowered toward the pavement, and she slowly shook her head. But the answer did not feel honest. Children who had been hurt often learned to protect the people who hurt them, even when those people did not deserve it. Marcus stood slowly and looked around the church parking lot again. The silence of the town pressed in from every direction. Somewhere far away a dog barked once, and then everything became quiet again. Whoever had abandoned this child had chosen the place carefully. A church late at night. Someone probably believed that a priest or a morning volunteer would find her eventually. But the night air was growing colder, and Marcus knew that a child should never be left outside this long. He removed his heavy leather jacket and walked a few steps closer to Emma. The jacket was large and worn from years of riding, the leather thick and strong. When he draped it gently around her shoulders, it nearly reached her knees. Emma looked down at the jacket with surprise. The emblem of the Hell's Angels was visible across the back, and she touched the leather carefully as if she had never felt something like it before. "Are you cold?" Marcus asked. Emma nodded slightly. Marcus then noticed something else that made his stomach tighten. Her shoes were thin canvas sneakers that offered almost no protection from the cold pavement. "Kid, you cannot stay out here tonight," he said quietly. Emma looked up at him again with that same cautious expression. "Where will I go?" she asked. Marcus rubbed his beard slowly while thinking. The town had a small police station and a family services office, but both buildings would be closed at this hour. Even if he brought her there, she might end up sitting in a cold waiting room for hours before anyone could help. Marcus had spent most of his life trusting his own instincts, and right now those instincts were telling him something very simple. This child needed someone who would not walk away. He gestured toward the large motorcycle parked near the curb. That machine looks scary, but it is not, he said. It is just loud. Emma studied them to her, but he also did not want to crush what little hope she might still be holding. Finally, he knelt down again, so they were face to face. Emma, he said slowly. Sometimes grown people make choices that hurt others. When that happens, it is not the fault of the child. Emma listened carefully, as if she were trying to understand words that felt much bigger than her small world. Marcus then reached out his large hand. The gesture was calm and patient. Come on, kid, he said softly. Let us get you somewhere warm before the night gets any colder. Emma Collins looked at the large hand Marcus Steele Lawson had extended toward her, but she did not take it right away. The small girl stood frozen beneath the dim church light, the oversized leather jacket wrapped around her thin shoulders, and the cloth rabbit pressed tightly against her chest. Her eyes moved slowly from Marcus' hand to his face, and then back toward the empty road again, as if she were still hoping that the car which left her there might somehow return. Marcus did not rush her. A man who had spent most of his life riding open highways understood that trust could not be forced. It had to come slowly, like the sunrise after a long night. The cold wind swept through Maple Street again, brushing past the old church doors and rattling the dry autumn leaves across the pavement. Emma shivered slightly inside the heavy jacket. Marcus noticed immediately. He lowered his hand and instead gently adjusted the collar of the leather jacket around her neck so it would keep more warmth inside. The jacket smelled faintly of road dust and motor oil, the scent of a life spent traveling across endless miles of American highways. Emma looked up at him again, still unsure. Are you really not going to leave? She asked quietly. Marcus shook his head once. I told you already, kid. Not tonight. His voice carried a calm certainty that seemed to settle the air around them. Emma studied his face for another long moment. Beneath the thick beard and weathered skin, there was something steady in his expression. It was not the hard look she had seen on other adults. Slowly she slipped her small hand into his. Her fingers were cold and light against his rough, calloused palm. Marcus closed his hand gently around hers, careful not to squeeze too tightly. There you go, he said softly. We are going to figure this out together. Emma walked beside him as they moved toward the large motorcycle parked near the curb. The machine looked enormous next to her small figure, the chrome parts reflecting the faint church light, while the dark metal frame seemed almost like a silent animal waiting to run. Emma stopped walking again when they reached it. Her eyes widened. That thing is really big, she said. Marcus let out a quiet chuckle. Yeah, it is a little big, but it has carried me across half the country and back more times than I can count. He gently lifted Emma and placed her carefully on the wide leather seat, while making sure the heavy jacket stayed wrapped around her shoulders. Emma held the cloth rabbit in one hand while gripping the edge of the seat with the other. Marcus crouched beside the motorcycle so he could look her in the eyes again. Emma, I am going to take you somewhere warm. There is a small diner about 5 minutes from here. The owner stays open all night for truck drivers. We can get you some hot chocolate and something to eat. Emma looked uncertain. What if someone gets mad because I am there? She asked. Marcus shook his head again. Nobody is going to get mad at you tonight. Not while I am around. Emma watched him closely and then slowly nodded. Marcus then stood and turned toward the street to start the motorcycle. But just as he reached for the handlebars, a sound cut through the quiet night. The distant roar of a powerful engine echoed down Maple Street. Marcus froze instantly. The sound was not coming from a motorcycle. It was a car moving fast, the kind of sound made by someone driving with anger rather than caution. Headlights suddenly appeared at the far end of the street, bright beams slicing through the darkness as a dark vehicle sped toward the church parking lot. Marcus' eyes narrowed. Emma noticed the change in his expression. Is that my daddy? She whispered. Marcus did not answer right away. Instead, he stepped between the motorcycle and the approaching road, placing his body instinctively in front of the small girl as the vehicle raced closer. Something deep in his instincts told him that the night was not finished bringing trouble. The bright headlights grew larger as the dark vehicle roared down Maple Street, its engine echoing loudly against the quiet buildings that lined the road. Marcus Steele Lawson stood still in front of the motorcycle, his broad shoulders blocking the small figure of Emma Collins behind him. The powerful beams of light washed across the front of the church and stretched over the empty pavement until they reached the place where Marcus stood waiting. The vehicle slowed sharply as it entered the church parking lot, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Emma tightened her grip on the cloth rabbit and leaned forward slightly from the motorcycle seat. "Is that him?" she whispered again. Marcus did not answer immediately. His eyes remained locked on the approaching car, while his instincts began measuring every detail. The vehicle was the same dark sedan he had seen earlier in the night, but now it moved with sudden urgency instead of secrecy. The driver slammed the brakes, and the car stopped only a few yards away from the church steps. The engine continued running, vibrating loudly in the still air. For several seconds nothing happened. Then the driver's side door opened with a hard swing, and a man stepped out. He was tall, but carried himself with the restless movement of someone who had already made too many bad decisions in his life. His eyes moved quickly across the parking lot until they landed on Marcus and the motorcycle. When he saw Emma sitting on the seat, his expression shifted from surprise to anger. The man walked forward with fast, heavy steps. "That is my kid," he shouted across the lot. "What do you think you are doing with her?" Emma shrank back slightly behind Marcus' shoulders when she heard the voice. Her fingers clutched the rabbit tighter as she whispered softly, "That is him." Marcus remained calm. His boots stayed planted firmly on the pavement as the man approached. The biker did not raise his voice, and he did not move aside. Instead, he spoke with a steady tone that carried across the cold night air. "Your kid," he repeated slowly. "Then why did you leave her standing out here with a sign around her neck?" The man stopped several feet away. His eyes flicked toward the motorcycle and then toward the leather jacket wrapped around Emma's shoulders. "I changed my mind," he said quickly. "That is all. Now move out of the way. I am taking her home." Marcus studied the man carefully. There was no concern in his face. No relief at finding his child safe. Only irritation that someone had interfered with his plans. Emma's voice trembled slightly from behind Marcus. "Please do not make me go back," she said quietly. The man's glare hardened immediately. "You do not get to talk," he snapped. Marcus felt the anger inside his chest grow stronger, but he kept his voice controlled. "She gets to talk," he said firmly. "And right now she is telling me she does not want to go anywhere with you." The man laughed harshly. "That does not matter. She belongs to me." Marcus shook his head slowly. "People do not belong to anyone," he replied. "Especially not a child." The man took another step forward as if trying to intimidate him. "You think that leather jacket makes you a hero," he sneered. "I know who you people are. Just a bunch of bikers who cause trouble." Marcus remained still. He had heard words like that for many years, and they no longer meant much to him. Behind him, Emma's voice came again, smaller but determined. "Please do not let him take me." Marcus looked back at her for a brief moment. The fear in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. When he turned back toward the man, his expression had changed. The calm patience was still there, but beneath it now stood something solid and unmovable. The man pointed toward the motorcycle. "I am warning you," he said angrily. "Move away from my daughter right now." Marcus Steele Lawson straightened his shoulders and took one slow step forward so that he stood fully between the man and the child. His voice remained quiet, but the certainty inside it was impossible to ignore. "She is not going anywhere with you tonight," he said. The cold wind moved through the empty church parking lot again as the two men faced each other beneath the dim yellow light. And Marcus knew deep inside that this moment was about to decide much more than a simple argument. The cold wind moved slowly across the church parking lot as the two men faced each other beneath the dim yellow light. Marcus Steele Lawson stood firm with his broad shoulders squared while the man who called himself Emma's father glared at him with growing frustration. The engine of the dark sedan continued to idle behind him, its low vibration filling the quiet night with a restless sound. Emma Collins sat frozen on the large motorcycle seat behind Marcus, her small hands clutching the cloth rabbit so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. Marcus could feel the tension in the air the same way a rider feels the pressure of an approaching storm. He had lived long enough to recognize when a moment was about to break. The man ran a hand through his hair and forced out a laugh that carried no humor. "You think you can play hero tonight," he said. "You do not know anything about this girl or about me." Marcus did not answer right away. His eyes stayed steady, watching every small movement the man made. In another life, Marcus had spent years dealing with men who used anger to hide weakness. He knew the pattern well. Finally, Marcus spoke in a calm voice that sounded almost patient. "Then tell me something worth knowing," he said. The man scoffed and gestured angrily toward Emma. "She is nothing but trouble. Always crying. Always asking for things. Her mother walked out years ago and left me with the mess. You think I have time to deal with that every day?" Emma lowered her head when she heard the words. The cloth rabbit pressed against her cheek as if it could hide her from the sound of them. Marcus felt something shift inside him as the man continued talking. That shift was not sudden rage. It was deeper than that. It was the quiet memory of a different night long ago. For a brief moment, Marcus' mind drifted away from the church parking lot and back through the years to a small house on the edge of a different town. The memory appeared clearly. A little girl with bright eyes running across a front yard toward him while he stood beside a motorcycle that was almost as loud as the one behind him now. Her laughter had once filled the air the same way the wind moved through Maple Street tonight. Her name had been Lily Lawson. She had been 7 years old the last time Marcus saw her smile. But the road had called to him in those years, and Marcus had followed it across countless miles without thinking about what he was leaving behind. One long ride had turned into many. One missed birthday had turned into several. Then one afternoon a phone call came from a hospital after a car accident on a rainy highway. Marcus had arrived too late to hear his daughter's voice again. The guilt from that day had followed him for every mile he had ridden since. Back in the present moment, Marcus slowly returned from the memory. The man in front of him was still talking with careless anger. "If you want the truth," he said harshly, "I only came back because I realized leaving her here might cause problems. Somebody might ask questions. I just want to take her and get out of here." Marcus' eyes darkened slightly when he heard those words. Emma's voice came softly from behind him. "I tried to be good," she said quietly. "I tried really hard." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a child who believed she had failed somehow. Marcus took a slow breath and then looked at the man again. His voice remained steady, but now there was something unbreakable inside it. "You did not come back for your daughter," he said. "You came back for yourself." The man's expression twisted with irritation. "Do not pretend you care," he snapped. "You are just some biker who showed up at the wrong place." Marcus Steele Lawson shook his head once. "Maybe I did show up at the right place after all," he replied quietly while the cold wind moved through the church lot again and the distant sound of the idling car faded into the background of a decision that had begun forming deep inside his heart. The cold wind continued to move across the church parking lot while the tension between the two men grew heavier with every passing second. Marcus Steele Lawson stood firm in front of the motorcycle, his broad frame shielding Emma Collins from the man who claimed to be her father. The dim church light above the wooden doors flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the pavement. The man rubbed his jaw with irritation and glanced back toward the dark sedan as if deciding what to do next. When he turned back toward Marcus, his patience was gone. "You are wasting my time," he said sharply. "Move out of the way and give me my kid." Marcus did not move. His boots remained planted firmly on the cold pavement, as if the ground itself had decided he should stay there. Behind him, Emma shifted slightly on the motorcycle seat. The large leather jacket still wrapped around her shoulders made her look even smaller than she already was. Her eyes stayed fixed on Marcus' back as though he were the only barrier between her and the world she feared returning to. The man suddenly took another step forward, closing the distance between them. His voice grew louder and more aggressive. "You think you can stand there and judge me?" he snapped. "You do not know anything about what it takes to raise a kid alone. You do not know how expensive it is, how exhausting it is." Marcus' eyes narrowed slightly, but he kept his voice calm. "Raising a child is hard," he said quietly. "But leaving one alone in the middle of the night is not raising a child." The man clenched his fists. For a moment it looked as though he might swing at Marcus, but instead he pointed toward the motorcycle again. "She is coming with me," he said through his teeth. "That is the end of it." Emma's small voice came from behind Marcus again, trembling but clear. "Please do not make me go with him." The words hung in the cold air like fragile glass. Marcus heard the fear in them, and something inside him hardened completely. The man heard them too, and his face twisted with anger. "You see what you are doing?" he barked toward Marcus. "You are turning her against me." Marcus slowly shook his head. "No," he replied. "She already made up her mind before I even got here." The man exhaled sharply and turned away for a second, as if trying to calm himself. Then he walked back toward the sedan and opened the rear door. For a brief moment Marcus thought the man might actually leave again. But instead the man leaned inside the car and began speaking to someone Marcus had not noticed before. A second later another man stepped out from the passenger side of the vehicle. This one was taller and heavier, with a thick jacket and a restless way of moving. That immediately put Marcus on alert. The newcomer walked around the front of the sedan and stood beside the first man. Both of them now faced Marcus across the parking lot. The first man gestured angrily toward the motorcycle. "That is the guy I told you about," he said. "Just some biker sticking his nose where it does not belong." The second man looked Marcus up and down carefully. His eyes paused on the Hell's Angels emblem on the leather jacket Emma was wearing. His lips curled into a slow grin that carried no kindness. "Well, now," he said quietly, "looks like we have a hero tonight." Marcus remained still, but his attention sharpened instantly. The night had just changed. What had begun as a desperate father trying to reclaim his child now looked very different. Two men standing together in a nearly empty church parking lot in the middle of the night rarely meant anything good. Emma shifted nervously behind him. Marcus could feel her small presence even without turning around. The second man cracked his knuckles and took a step forward. "Let us make this simple," he said. "Give the girl back, and you can ride away before things get messy." Marcus Steele Lawson looked from one man to the other while the cold wind moved through Maple Street again. His voice remained quiet, but carried a weight that neither of them expected. "I am afraid it is already messy," he said calmly while his mind prepared for whatever the next moment might bring. The cold air in the church parking lot felt heavier now as the two men stood side by side across from Marcus Steele Lawson. The second man kept his eyes fixed on Marcus while slowly rolling his shoulders as if preparing for a fight he expected to enjoy. The first man, who had claimed to be Emma Collins' father, crossed his arms impatiently and glanced toward the dark road again. The engine of the sedan continued to hum behind them like a restless animal waiting to run. Marcus remained where he stood with calm control, but his mind was already measuring every movement, every distance, every possible outcome. Years on dangerous roads had taught him how quickly a quiet moment could become something far worse. Behind him, Emma shifted slightly on the motorcycle seat. The oversized leather jacket slipped down one shoulder, and she quickly pulled it back around herself. Her eyes moved from the two men to Marcus again. "Steele," she whispered softly. Marcus heard her immediately. He did not turn his head, but his voice came back to her with quiet reassurance. "I am right here, kid." Emma swallowed nervously. She leaned forward just enough that her small hand reached the back of Marcus' arm. Her fingers wrapped around the thick leather sleeve as if anchoring herself to the only safe thing she could find in the night. "Please do not let them take me," she said in a trembling voice that carried more fear than any child should ever have to hold. The words settled deep inside Marcus' chest. For a moment, the entire parking lot seemed to fall silent except for the distant rustle of wind through the trees. Marcus slowly looked back over his shoulder at Emma. Her eyes were wide and bright with worry, but there was something else there too. Hope. The kind of fragile hope that appears when a child believes someone might actually protect them. Marcus knelt slightly so he could meet her gaze. "Emma," he said quietly, "listen to me for a second." The two men across the lot watched with irritation as Marcus focused only on the small girl behind him. Emma nodded slowly. Marcus spoke with a steady calm that carried the weight of someone who had made a decision deep inside his soul. "Nothing is going to happen to you tonight. Do you understand me?" Emma looked uncertain, but she nodded again. Marcus continued speaking softly, so that the moment felt almost separate from the tension across the parking lot. "You did nothing wrong. None of this is your fault." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back bravely. "I tried to be good," she repeated quietly. Marcus nodded once. "I know you did, kid." Then he gently placed one large hand over the small hand she had wrapped around his sleeve. The contact was brief, but it carried a promise stronger than any long speech. When Marcus stood again, his posture had changed. The quiet patience in his stance was still there, but something deeper had settled into place. Across the lot, the second man smirked and shook his head. "That little talk is touching," he said mockingly, "but it does not change the situation. The girl is coming with us." Marcus slowly turned his attention back to the two men. The first man folded his arms again and glared impatiently. "I am done arguing," he said. "Move away from the bike." Marcus' voice remained calm. "I already told you she is not going anywhere with you tonight." The second man laughed under his breath. "You really believe you can stop both of us?" Marcus did not respond immediately. Instead, he took one slow step forward so that he stood completely between the motorcycle and the two men. His broad shoulders blocked their path completely. His eyes moved from one face to the other without a trace of fear. "I am not here to stop you," he said quietly. "I am here to protect her." The words landed with a quiet force that neither man had expected. The wind swept through the church parking lot again, carrying dry leaves across the pavement as the tension between them grew tighter with every passing second. Behind Marcus, the small figure of Emma Collins remained seated on the motorcycle, watching the man in front of her as if her entire future depended on what he would do next. The wind swept dry leaves across the church parking lot as Marcus Steele Lawson stood firm between the two men and the motorcycle behind him. The dim yellow light above the church doors flickered again, casting shifting shadows across the pavement. The second man cracked his neck slowly and stepped forward while the first man folded his arms with a growing expression of impatience. The night had grown colder, but Marcus barely felt it. His focus remained sharp and steady, the way it had been during many dangerous moments on long highways and forgotten roads. Behind him, Emma Collins sat quietly on the wide leather seat of the motorcycle, the oversized jacket wrapped tightly around her small frame. Her fingers held the cloth rabbit close while her eyes stayed locked on Marcus, as though he were the only safe place left in the world. The second man took another step closer and tilted his head slightly. "You talk like a hero," he said slowly. "But heroes usually end up lying on the ground when they pick the wrong fight." Marcus did not react to the threat. Instead, he glanced briefly toward the dark road leading away from Maple Street. The town was still asleep. No cars passed. No lights appeared in nearby houses. It was the kind of silence that made people believe they could do anything without witnesses. The first man spoke again, with sharp frustration. "This is ridiculous," he said. "I am calling the police and telling them you are kidnapping my daughter. Let them deal with you." Marcus looked back at him calmly. "That is not a bad idea," he replied. "Maybe the police should hear about a child being left alone outside a church with a sign around her neck." The first man froze for a moment. His jaw tightened as the meaning of the words settled in. The second man glanced at him with irritation. "You did not tell me about that part," he muttered. The first man shook his head angrily. "That does not matter. She is still my kid." Marcus' voice remained level. "A parent protects their child," he said quietly. "A parent does not abandon them in the dark." The second man suddenly stepped forward again, his patience clearly gone. "Enough talking," he said. "Move out of the way before we move you." Marcus shifted his weight slightly, but did not step back. His broad frame remained planted directly between them and the motorcycle. Behind him, Emma's voice came again, very small but determined. "Steele," she whispered. Marcus answered without turning his head. "I hear you, kid." Emma swallowed and spoke again with trembling courage. "I am scared." The words struck Marcus harder than any threat from the men in front of him. For a brief moment, the memory of his own daughter returned again like a quiet echo from the past. The thought of failing another child made his decision clearer than ever. Marcus reached slowly into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out a small mobile phone. The movement made both men in front of him tense immediately. The second man frowned. "What are you doing?" Marcus looked down at the phone for a moment and then back at them. "I think we are done solving this alone," he said. The first man suddenly looked uneasy. "Wait a minute," he said quickly. "You do not need to do that." Marcus ignored him and pressed the screen with his thumb. Emma watched carefully from the motorcycle seat as Marcus lifted the phone to his ear. The call rang for a moment in the quiet night. Then a calm voice answered on the other end. "Maple County Sheriff Office, how can we help you?" Marcus spoke clearly and without hesitation. "This is Marcus Lawson," he said. "I am standing outside the church on Maple Street with a young girl who was abandoned here tonight. There are two men trying to take her away, and I think you should send someone right now." The silence on the other end lasted only a second before the voice responded firmly. "Deputies are on the way. Stay where you are." Marcus lowered the phone slowly while the cold wind swept through the parking lot again. Across from him, the two men exchanged a quick, uneasy glance. The balance of the night had just changed. The uneasy silence that followed Marcus Steele Lawson's phone call seemed to stretch across the entire church parking lot. The wind continued to move through Maple Street, pushing dry leaves along the pavement while the faint hum of the idling sedan engine filled the air. Marcus lowered the phone slowly and slipped it back into his pocket without taking his eyes off the two men standing across from him. The first man, who claimed to be Emma Collins' father, looked suddenly less confident than before. His arms were no longer folded. Instead, his hands rested nervously on his hips while his eyes flicked briefly toward the dark road leading away from the church. The second man let out a quiet breath through his teeth and shook his head. "You really called the sheriff," he muttered. Marcus' voice remained calm and steady. Yes, I did, he replied. The first man rubbed the back of his neck with irritation. You did not have to do that, he said quickly. This is a family situation. Marcus gave a slight shake of his head. A child left alone in the middle of the night is not a family situation, he answered. It is a serious problem. Behind him, Emma Collins remained seated on the motorcycle. The oversized leather jacket still wrapped around her shoulders looked almost like armor protecting her small frame. Her eyes moved nervously between the men and the empty road. Steele, she whispered quietly. Marcus answered without turning around. I am here, kid. Emma nodded to herself and held the cloth rabbit tighter. Across the parking lot, the second man stepped closer to the first and spoke in a lower voice that Marcus could still hear clearly in the quiet night. This was not part of the plan, he said. The first man glared at him. Just relax, he muttered. The cops will not get here for a while. The second man looked less certain. Maybe not, but I do not want to be standing here when they do. Marcus noticed the shift immediately. Confidence had been replaced with unease. The first man suddenly raised his voice again toward Marcus as if trying to regain control of the situation. You think the sheriff is going to side with you, he said sharply. You are a biker standing in a church parking lot with someone else, child. Marcus remained completely still. The truth usually speaks for itself, he said quietly. The second man sighed heavily and looked toward the sedan again. I told you this was a bad idea, he said under his breath. The first man ignored him and pointed a finger at Marcus with frustration. Listen to me, he said. When the deputies get here, I will explain everything. They will take her back to me where she belongs. Marcus' eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice stayed calm. That decision will not be yours tonight, he said. The wind rustled the trees beside the church again, and for a moment the entire street seemed to hold its breath. Then in the far distance a new sound reached the parking lot. At first it was faint, almost lost beneath the whisper of the wind. But within seconds it became unmistakable. The rising wail of a police siren echoed across the quiet town. Emma lifted her head immediately when she heard it. Steele, she whispered again. That is them, right? Marcus allowed himself a small nod. Yes, kid, he answered softly. That is them. Across the parking lot both men heard the sound as well. The second man cursed quietly and looked at the first with frustration. I am not sticking around for this, he said. The first man hesitated for a moment as the siren grew louder in the distance. His eyes moved from Marcus to Emma and then back toward the road again. The plan he had imagined earlier in the night was clearly falling apart. Marcus remained exactly where he was standing with calm patience while the approaching siren continued to grow, louder with every passing second. For the first time since the night began, the balance of power had shifted completely, and everyone in the parking lot could feel it. The distant police siren continued to grow louder as it echoed through the quiet streets surrounding the small church on Maple Street. The sound carried through the cold night air like a warning that the long, tense standoff was finally reaching its turning point. Marcus Steele Lawson remained standing between the motorcycle and the two men across the parking lot. His posture had not changed. His boots were still planted firmly on the pavement, and his broad shoulders still blocked the path leading to Emma Collins. Behind him, Emma sat very still on the motorcycle seat, wrapped in the heavy leather jacket that hung almost to her knees. Her small hands clutched the cloth rabbit tightly, while her eyes moved back and forth between Marcus and the men standing across the lot. The approaching siren made her heart beat faster, but for the first time that night her fear was mixed with something else. Relief. Across from Marcus, the two men were clearly feeling the pressure of the moment as well. The second man paced a few steps toward the sedan and then back again while shaking his head in frustration. I told you this would go bad, he muttered. The first man glared toward Marcus with anger that was now mixed with uncertainty. You think this is over, he snapped. The deputies will hear my side of the story too. Marcus answered with the same calm tone he had used all night. That is exactly what they should do, he replied. They should hear everything. The second man suddenly stopped pacing and looked toward the road again. The flashing red and blue lights of a patrol vehicle were now visible in the distance at the far end of Maple Street. The siren echoed off the buildings as the vehicle sped closer to the church. That is our signal, he said quietly to the first man. I am leaving. The first man hesitated only a second before his frustration turned into hurried action. Fine, he said sharply. Let the biker deal with the police alone. Both men quickly moved toward the sedan. The second man climbed into the passenger side, while the first man jumped behind the wheel and slammed the door. The engine roared as the sedan spun around in a quick turn across the parking lot gravel. Emma gasped quietly behind Marcus as the car sped away toward the opposite end of the street, just as the patrol vehicle reached the church entrance. The red and blue lights flashed across the church walls and the pavement as the sheriff vehicle pulled into the parking lot. Marcus did not move as the car approached. The patrol vehicle slowed and stopped a few yards away. The engine idled for a moment before the driver's side door opened. A tall deputy stepped out, his flashlight already in hand. The beam of light swept across the lot before settling on Marcus and the motorcycle behind him. "Evening," the deputy said in a firm but controlled voice. Marcus raised one hand slightly to show he meant no trouble. "Evening, officer," he replied calmly. The deputy took a few careful steps forward and lowered the flashlight slightly when he noticed the small figure sitting on the motorcycle behind Marcus. Emma shrank back slightly under the bright light, but Marcus gently rested a hand on the seat beside her. "It is all right, kid," he said quietly. The deputy studied the scene carefully. He noticed the oversized leather jacket wrapped around Emma and the way she remained close behind Marcus, as if the biker were the only safe place she trusted. The officer then looked back toward Marcus. "We received a call about a child being abandoned here," he said. Marcus nodded slowly. "That is correct," he answered. "I found her standing here alone with a sign around her neck." The deputy expression grew more serious as he absorbed the words. Emma looked down at the cloth rabbit in her hands while the flashing lights reflected softly across the church walls. For the first time that night, the quiet town of Maple Street had witnesses to the truth of what had happened, and Marcus Steele Lawson knew that the next few minutes would decide what came next for the small girl sitting behind him. The flashing red and blue lights from the patrol vehicle painted slow-moving colors across the walls of the small church as the deputy stood a few feet away from Marcus Steele Lawson and the motorcycle. The quiet town of Maple Street was no longer completely asleep. Curtains shifted slightly in a nearby house and a porch light flickered on down the road as the sound of the siren faded into silence. The deputy kept his flashlight lowered now, his attention moving carefully between Marcus and the small girl sitting behind him. Emma Collins remained wrapped inside the oversized leather jacket, her small frame nearly disappearing inside the heavy folds of worn leather. She held her cloth rabbit close and watched the deputy with uncertain eyes. Marcus spoke calmly as he explained what had happened. "I came down Maple Street about 15 minutes ago and saw her standing alone on the church steps," he said. "She had a cardboard sign tied around her neck that said she belonged to no one." The deputy frowned slightly as he listened. "That is when you called us?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. 2 men showed up a few minutes later. One of them claimed to be her father, but the girl said she did not want to go with him. They left right before you arrived." The deputy looked toward the empty road where the sedan had disappeared. His jaw tightened as he absorbed the information. "Do you know which direction they went?" he asked. Marcus pointed calmly toward the south end of Maple Street. "That way. They left fast once they heard the siren." The deputy reached for the radio on his shoulder and spoke a short message giving the direction of the departing vehicle. Somewhere beyond the quiet neighborhood, another patrol car acknowledged the call. After finishing the report, the deputy turned his attention fully to Emma. He stepped a little closer, but kept his movements slow and careful so he would not frighten her. "Hey there, kid," he said gently. "My name is Deputy Harris." Emma looked at Marcus for a moment before answering. Marcus gave her a small, reassuring nod. Emma then looked back at the officer. "My name is Emma Collins," she said softly. Deputy Harris nodded kindly. "Emma, that must have been very scary for you tonight." Emma lowered her eyes and nodded once. The cloth rabbit remained pressed against her chest. Deputy Harris glanced at Marcus again and then back to the child. "Do you have any family nearby, Emma?" he asked carefully. Emma hesitated before speaking. "My daddy said nobody wanted me anymore," she whispered. The quiet words hung heavily in the night air. Deputy Harris' expression hardened slightly as he heard them. Marcus stood silently beside the motorcycle while the weight of the moment settled over the parking lot. The deputy took a slow breath and then spoke again in a softer voice. "Emma, you did nothing wrong," he said. "Sometimes adults make choices that are not fair to children. But that does not mean you are alone." Emma looked up uncertainly. Marcus gently placed a steady hand on the edge of the motorcycle seat beside her. The simple gesture seemed to calm her. Deputy Harris then looked back at Marcus. "You stayed with her this whole time?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "I was not going to leave her here alone." The deputy studied him for a moment. The large biker standing beside the motorcycle did not look like the kind of person many people expected to find protecting a child outside a church in the middle of the night. But the scene in front of him told its own story. Deputy Harris finally nodded with quiet respect. "I am glad you did," he said. He then reached for the radio again and requested assistance from County Child Services. "It may take a little while for them to arrive," he explained. Emma shifted slightly on the motorcycle seat when she heard that. Marcus noticed immediately. "Do not worry, kid," he said quietly. "I am still right here." Emma looked down at the leather sleeve of the jacket around her shoulders and then back at Marcus' face. The flashing patrol lights continued to move slowly across the pavement as the long, difficult night began to move toward a new beginning. The flashing lights of the patrol vehicle continued to move slowly across the quiet church parking lot as the long night finally began to settle into something calmer. Deputy Harris stood near the front of his patrol car, speaking softly into the radio, while Marcus Steele Lawson remained beside the motorcycle where Emma Collins still sat wrapped inside the oversized leather jacket. The cold wind had eased slightly, leaving the town of Maple Street wrapped in a quiet stillness once again. Emma watched the deputy for a moment and then looked back at Marcus. Her voice was small but hopeful. "Steele," she said softly, "are you still staying here?" Marcus gave her a calm nod. "I told you already, kid. I am not going anywhere tonight." Emma seemed to relax a little when she heard that. The cloth rabbit rested against her cheek, while the large leather jacket hung around her shoulders like a shield from the cold night air. A few minutes later, another vehicle pulled slowly into the church parking lot. This one did not have flashing lights. Instead, it carried the simple county seal on the door. A woman stepped out holding a folder and a warm blanket. Deputy Harris walked toward her and spoke quietly for a moment before guiding her toward Marcus and Emma. The woman approached with a gentle expression and stopped a few feet away so she would not frighten the child. "Hello, Emma," she said kindly. "My name is Miss Alvarez. I work with County Child Services." Emma looked at Marcus again before answering. Marcus gave another reassuring nod, and Emma slowly turned her attention back to the woman. Miss Alvarez knelt slightly so she could speak at Emma level. "Deputy Harris told me you had a very long night," she said softly. Emma nodded once. Miss Alvarez unfolded the blanket and carefully draped it over Emma's shoulders on top of the leather jacket. "You are safe now," she continued. "We are going to make sure you have a warm place to sleep and people who will take care of you." Emma listened quietly, but then asked the question that had been sitting in her heart all night. "Does that mean I have to go somewhere else right now?" Miss Alvarez hesitated only briefly before answering honestly. "For tonight, yes," she said gently. "But that place will be safe and warm." Marcus watched the exchange silently. He knew the system would take Emma somewhere temporary until a longer plan could be made. Yet something inside him felt unsettled at the idea of her disappearing into a place filled with strangers after everything she had just endured. Emma looked down at the cloth rabbit again and then back up at Marcus. Her voice trembled slightly. "Steele," she said, "are you going to disappear too?" The question landed with a quiet weight that none of the adults in the parking lot could ignore. Marcus knelt beside the motorcycle, so their eyes were level again. "Emma," he said slowly, "sometimes people come into your life when you need them most. Tonight you needed someone to stand beside you, and that is exactly what happened." Emma listened carefully. Marcus then continued speaking in a calm, steady voice. "The people here are going to help you find a safe home. And I promise you something important." Emma's eyes lifted slightly. "What is that?" she asked. Marcus placed a gentle hand over the sleeve of the leather jacket, still wrapped around her shoulders. "I am not disappearing," he said quietly. "If you ever need someone again, I will be around." Miss Alvarez watched the moment silently before nodding with quiet understanding. Emma took a deep breath and then slowly climbed down from the motorcycle seat. She held the cloth rabbit in one hand while keeping the leather jacket wrapped tightly around herself. Before stepping toward the county vehicle, she turned back to Marcus one more time. "Thank you, Steele," she said softly. Marcus gave her a small nod as the flashing lights faded and the quiet church parking lot returned to silence. And as Emma walked toward the waiting car, she carried something she had not felt when the night began. The knowledge that even in the darkest moment a stranger on a motorcycle had looked at a frightened child and decided that she was worth protecting.